Hey everyone, this is Scott Kirsner, editor and co-founder of Innovation Leader, and I'm really glad you could join us this afternoon for this overview of a few of the new resources that we've been building at Innovation Leader and a discussion about how they can be applied. With me on the webcast today is Aaron Proietti out in Colorado. Aaron, do you want to give a quick intro of who you are and also give us the snow report from Colorado?
Absolutely. So we did get hit with a fair amount of snow this past weekend, but I'm pleased to report that the sun's been beating down on it and there's not a trace of it left any longer. So gotta love Colorado Springs. A quick introduction of myself. I currently am the founder of a company called Adaptivity Enterprises, which is just a single member LLC. So right now it's just me thinking about and writing about innovation, but in order to establish a little bit of credibility, I can talk about my background. I spent the first part of my career at Capital One in a very innovative entrepreneurial environment. Worked on a startup for about 6 months before I tired of that, and then I went on to join Transamerica. Spent better part of 8.5 years at Transamerica, building and growing an innovation department and competency for that organization. Held a few titles, including Chief Innovation Officer of the Life and Protection Division, Chief Customer Advocate, as well as the head of the Marketing Innovation Lab, which launched in Q4 of 2015. I did leave Transamerica last year to be a better father and husband, and I hope that I've accomplished that, but I still want to remain involved in the innovation world. So Scott, thank you for keeping me involved and giving me an outlet for talking about and thinking about innovation.
All right, cool. Well, I want to give just a little bit of an overview about Innovation Leader. We've put together the largest community of corporate innovation, strategy execs, R&D leaders, and really focus on helping them achieve impact. And one of the ways we're trying to do that is with research and case studies and also downloadable resources like these. We always like to mention all of the partner firms, software and services providers that support Innovation Leader, and you'll meet them at our events and you read their insights in our magazine and our PDFs. So we're really grateful to them. The overview today, we're going to talk about 6 new resources, all of which can be found at innovationleader.com/resources. And then once you're on that page, you'll see about 150 or so resources from large companies, our membership, people who've been participants in events that we've run. But when you click the Innovation Leader Resources tab, that will filter to all the resources that we have created. Most of these are available to folks who are active members of Innovation Leader, but the first one that we're going to talk about is the Ecosystem Map and Discussion Guide is accessible to anyone. So this is a project that we created really thinking about something that could be used in the really early stages of innovation exploration or the innovation journey in a big company. I think it's still relevant probably in the intermediate stages as well, but this is kind of designed to be a discussion starter with different constituencies in the organization about, you know, where the centers of power are, who wants to be active participants in an innovation initiative or a reinvigorated R&D initiative, and maybe where some of the roadblocks or barriers are going to be, who you're going to need resources and support from. And so this is a PDF that you know, looks best. You can see there's a lot of text there, so it looks best when it's printed out large format. You can find it at the URL below, but we've got a kind of detail of it here. You can see up in the core, the sort of yellow part at the top are all of the core functions that obviously play a big role when you're talking about doing anything new. The CFO and the CEO and HR and IT and marketing. And then I'll zoom in here a little bit into kind of part of that core. You can see the existing R&D organization there on the left. And we try to map out sort of some of the ways that these groups think about innovation. So you can see corporate development at the top. their role tends to be M&A and investments and often buying innovation as opposed to doing it organically in-house. Sales and support, number 9 on our map, can be a great source of insights about the customer, but they can also complain if you're selling or creating something that's difficult to support or priced too low or has a different business model to it. So each of these areas of the map has a discussion question. Here the discussion is, what incentives can you put in place for these constituencies in the core of the company to embrace new ideas rather than poking holes in them and withholding resources. So this is really designed as a way to have conversations either with the innovation team or potentially with top leadership or people who may be funding or supporting the innovation team in some way. I'll just go back to so you can see the kind of big picture, including thinking about new innovation initiatives, that red ring that you might get started, the startup ecosystem and university researchers and venture capital firms that surround the company, as well as customers, and the way that they can provide input and guidance when you're doing something new, or sometimes the sort of high expectations that they may have for your company. So that's the ecosystem map, and again, this URL here at the bottom of the page is where you can download this one. One of the exercises I'll mention before we move on to the next thing that we did at the Front End of Innovation conference earlier this month in Boston was to hand out this map to everybody in the room and say, okay, at your company, who are the big supporters of innovation, who are the skeptics, and get people talking about, who tends to fall into which category, and what are some things you've tried for bringing the skeptics on board. And that can get some really interesting conversations going. These were kind of mixed groups of people from different companies and different industries, and we had kind of groups of 3 or 4 people having that discussion, but that's another way that you can use this ecosystem map. So let's move on to this great PowerPoint presentation that Aaron created a few weeks ago, which is really sort of a next stage, as I see it, a next stage resource when you're actually trying to build the nuts and bolts case for investing in innovation. So Aaron, why don't you describe this one?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I love the ecosystem map because it articulates the universal truth that innovation is complex and ambiguous, and it also gives you some of the questions that you can ask to start to define or understand the complexity and ambiguity of innovation. And that's a thread that for the resources that I've helped put together is common through these resources is, let's try to make sense of innovation as a strategy. A lot of organizations don't have a formal innovation strategy yet, and it's amazing to me, but it still is the case. In fact, I've found that many organizations are set up so that innovation is not going to succeed because of the business processes that are at play. Senior level decision makers are often looking through a lens of short-termism, where they're trying to manage to short-term results. And in that environment, innovation becomes really a nice to have at best, and maybe even a frivolous pursuit. So this PowerPoint presentation is a short effort at trying to help the most senior executives understand what the vision is for innovation, and to get everyone in a common framework and common language about innovation. So we tried to keep it very simple, really just 9 slides plus a title slide and an agenda slide, which can serve the purpose of taking an executive team through the case of launching an innovation initiative for your company, which fits squarely within your company's or your organization's current strategy, and ultimately which benefits your customers, benefits your employees, and benefits the shareholders of the company. So I hope it's that simple. We can go through a couple of the slides here. So you can see the types of things that we've put in here. So on each one of the slides in this resource, you will see some yellow sticky notes or call out boxes, which will help you to customize this type of slide approach to your organization. One of the most important slides is this financial justification for innovation investment. Really, it's considering the fact that if your status quo is working, you do not need innovation, but in most organizations, on some relevant financial metric, you can articulate and show that the outlook for the company is probably not going to meet the shareholders' expectations for the company. Some companies will look at earnings, others will look at revenue, others net income, or other relevant metric that is spoken and considered in that company. So you can customize this type of approach to whatever metric makes sense. But really, this slide is trying to show that there is an innovation imperative, that there must be an investment made. Otherwise, in some time horizon, you will have a growth gap because the company's status quo was not sufficient and innovation was not invested in. So, this is one example, and this is probably one of the linchpin slides of this presentation. A second one is this next slide, success measures and milestones, which makes it clear that this first presentation is simply the initial ask presentation. It's important to have common expectations, understanding of the goals of innovation, to establish a joint understanding of that growth gap that we just showed, and ultimately to gain executive commitment that innovation is an imperative. And that's all just the orange box here, developing a shared vision of the role of innovation within a company. The hard work is not done after you work on these 9 slides, obviously, and that's what kind of comes next. Ultimately, you do need to answer the questions of what strategy and tactics are you going to employ, which innovation initiatives will you go after, and then, as we all know, you need to have a process for regularly iterating and understanding how the innovation strategy is progressing, which ultimately brings you back to an iteration of that shared vision. So innovation lifecycle is something that you can establish up front and make sure that the executives understand how much attention is required of them to make sure that innovation is successful. And you're also giving them some decision-making powers by putting this framework out there and telling them at what points will their feedback be valuable. So
great. And I should mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
I should mention that we provide all these resources in an editable format. So this is really intended to be a PowerPoint presentation that the yellow sticky notes that Aaron was referring to can help people customize for their own particular situation. But sorry, Aaron, I think I interrupted you there.
Well, I was just going to transition to the next resource. So once you've gone through these 9 slides with the executive team, you can leave it with them that the next step is to develop a corporate innovation roadmap, and that you'll return to them in a certain period of time, maybe a few weeks, with the first outline of what that innovation roadmap looks like. So I'll turn it back to Scott.
Cool. This is something, we're simple people here at Innovation Leader, and so we like simple documents. We were really inspired by the business model canvas and started to think about, okay, if you're talking about an innovation program, could you use that same really streamlined format to think about, how are you designing an innovation program, in May of 2017, and maybe what modifications will you make after 3 months of learning, after 6 months of learning, after a year of learning. And so this is really a 2-page PDF that you can download. The first page kind of explains what we mean by each question, but really, I think you could probably, find it useful just with this particular PDF, and it's sort of a worksheet that you can fill out. One answer to the question in the chat, are we going to talk about innovation culture? Yes, we will. Specifically, the very last resource deals with that, and I think we'll probably touch on it in advance of that. So these are questions, around strategy and who in the company is defining the vision, what are the objectives you're setting, who's going to be responsible for executing, what's the oversight kind of governance system going to look like, where does funding come from? Obviously, the list of tactics could be infinite in terms of the types of things that you're going to try. Under execution, we ask people to lay out who are the internal partners and external partners that are going to help that core execution team in box number 3. What incentives might you want to put in place? For example, if you want startups to partner with you, what are the incentives for them to spend time, taking meetings and collaborating with your company? Is it about investment? Is it about we may distribute your product? Is it about we'll invite you to our big annual trade show and give you lots of, a big marketing push? And then finally, that third column is about impact. How are you going to measure the success of what you're doing? How are you going to communicate impact? And that could be internally around the company or externally. As a quick aside, I was talking to somebody who had, like Erin, been in the financial services industry running an innovation initiative. And, one of the things that she ran into was just not being able to get the attention of the internal communication groups to sort of explain and share the success stories of what she was doing. And I think felt like that, that led to sort of a lack of understanding and a lack of support around the company. So communicating internally, communicating externally to markets and investors and prospective employees is important. And finally, the last box there is about capturing learnings. And a lot of times, we see people don't really have a place or a process for recording tests that didn't work, things that they've learned about, a governance committee being too big, or, the evolution of different documents or processes in the program, keeping those in one central place so that as new people join the team, or as maybe new leadership comes in overseeing the team, you kind of have that archive of where you've been and what you've learned. This is just kind of a zoom in to the corporate innovation roadmap. You can see all the check boxes of different tactics that you might try. I think the next thing we want to talk about is this Word document progress report or impact report that Erin created. So Erin, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, I was excited to help assemble this. It's kind of the culmination of all the hard lessons learned that I had in my years at Transamerica. The key lesson that it addresses is that innovation accounting is very tricky business, and many people want to understand the value that innovation is adding to the corporation, and it's only really easy to measure innovation costs. Unfortunately, the evaluation of the benefits of innovation is not a trivial exercise, and it's for a lot of the complexity and ambiguity that we've already talked about. But innovation has a long time horizon, often has very ambiguous ownership, and organizations kind of always grapple with this question of how do we measure the incremental gains from our innovation initiatives. So I'm not saying that this progress report in any way answers those questions. In fact, it kind of deflects attention away from those questions to answer a different question. And that question is not looking back at how much value has innovation created, but instead constantly asking, what does the company require from innovation in order to achieve its goals? So by regularly reporting on the answer to that question, what does the company require from innovation in order to achieve its goals, you can have a discussion with the key stakeholders in the organization about what are the marketplace signals that you're seeing, what tweaks might be required in response to those marketplace signals, and continually justify the investment in innovation as a core competency. So this progress report does not lead with a list of the initiatives that are going on in the organization. Instead, it leads with the vision statement, which reminds everyone why innovation is important. So, it may be something like to be a market leader or to provide the world with your product, or whatever that vision statement is. Articulating that up at the top is very important so that you can connect the dots of why are we innovating throughout the entire document. The innovation landscape, like we kind of showed at the outset, is a very complex ecosystem and environment. In fact, I've seen many executive teams who really struggle to understand what's going on outside of their own organization. And they have, at the very best, an inconsistent understanding with each other about what are the key marketplace signals that we're seeing in the innovation landscape. So by leading with that in your monthly progress report, or you can make this a quarterly report, whatever is the right timing for your company, you can establish kind of a level set of what's going on in the world. So you'll see here that this landscape update that I've created is kind of a sample one, but it talks about who are the disruptors, potential disruptors of our business lines. Who are the new entrants? Is it startups? Is it Amazon? Is it a new .com? What emerging technologies or other startups of interest should we be monitoring, and how has that changed since the last time we talked about it? So maybe there's a new technology like blockchain, which is going to affect your organization in some manner. This is where you can highlight that. And before you talk about the innovation initiatives that you're working on, you can say, hey, everyone, take a look. There's this huge technology which is going to impact our business at some point in time. We need to be talking about that. Competitors are another thing that you should be monitoring. And again, there's probably an inconsistent understanding at the steering committee or governance committee or executive committee level of what your competitors are doing. So this is a great way to kind of level set that. There are customer trends that are emerging. Maybe it's a mobile trend. Maybe it's focusing on millennials, or maybe there's the Internet of Things, which is emerging, and customers are being more connected than ever before. And you can talk about that here. And certainly there are new regulations. Maybe the FAA or FDA has put out a new regulation that affects your business somehow, which will certainly affect your innovation strategy. By leading with this, it starts the discussion for the next page of, are we working on the right things? So again, not necessarily taking stock in what have we done to date, but instead taking stock in what else needs to be done in order to execute our vision. So in this next section, there's a bunch of different examples of the things you might report on. You might talk about new product development, a new mobile platform that you're developing, a next generation version. You might talk about training initiatives or cultural initiatives, surveying initiatives, whatever fits your organization. This next section is the place to put it. So that you may have projects in an innovation lab, for instance. And you'll notice that the columns here don't focus necessarily on what have we accomplished so far, but are really more talking about what is the long-term goal of this initiative, and what is the next phase coming up, and how can we expect that transition from the current phase to the next phase to happen.
And Aaron, is your terminology there in the status column where it says transitioning, is that does that suggest transitioning kind of from the innovation team into a business unit or into a rollout?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So in this instance, maybe this is a mobile version of a product that was developed in an innovation lab setting, so maybe outside of the company's four walls. And at some point, there was an innovation manager who was accountable for building that prototype, for launching out, whether it's a beta test or some other similar type of testing, and measuring the results. And then in this fictitious example, it's at the point where, we need to transition this to a business unit who's going to take it and run with it so that the innovation resources can start to turn their attention to a new initiative.
Got it. And I forget if we have another example. Oh, we do have one more example from the progress report. So let's talk to this before we move on to the next thing.
Yeah, so it's important as well to always be talking about it's very easy to see what's included in a progress report. It's very difficult to see what's missing. And I think as executives are really pinched for time, their whole attention on innovation might be the 30 minutes that you have to share with them this progress report. They may not see what's actually missing. So it's important to call that out. So this last section is specifically that. It talks about what things have we talked about as a company that our opportunities or risks are not being addressed. So, are there things like a products per customer improvement goal that the innovation team has not yet focused on? It's important to draw your attention to that so that you continually justify the investment in innovation. Restated, you stop kind of the seed or the line of questioning, should we be innovating? Should we be spending all this money? Because the executive can see, okay, if I stopped investing in innovation, I will not be able to achieve my products per customer goal. So maybe more innovation is needed. So by highlighting that, you're kind of bringing it to the forefront that we still have a lot of work that needs to be done. This isn't just about what have we done, but it's always about continuously improving the organization to execute on its vision.
Yeah, and certainly it's a lot of the feedback that we hear at Innovation Leader is, when we report on company X in somebody's industry, that can be very useful to say, hey, our competitor just opened up a lab in Boston or in Singapore to work with customers on new products and co-creation, and that sort of thing can help really create the urgency that you're talking about.
Yeah, I've seen it in my old company where out of one side of the mouth, the executives are talking about what the competitors are doing, and on the other side of their mouth, they're telling us that they put building external labs on hold. And so it's important to remind them, last month you put that on hold, which is why we're not doing it. So you can talk all you want about what the competitors are building, but just let me remind you every month through this progress report that you put that on hold, and we're not going to do anything until we have that funding.
Right. I think this next resource is the RACI matrix, which will be pretty much impossible, I think, for people to read on the slide here, but is much clearer in Excel. And I think we have a detail on the next page as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that you added the bird's eye view here, because it is a colorful, piece of art. But it's not meant to just be a piece of art. It is really meant to bring order to the chaos of innovation. So something I experienced was just what I can simplify as role ambiguity in innovation. So everyone wants to be innovative, and you get this situation inside of big organizations where you push out a cultural initiative which tells everyone we must innovate, but doesn't tell everyone how to interact with each other. So this business process management tool, the RACI matrix, can help to clarify these roles and build support for innovation by having a structured dialogue around it. Now, it's not going to be right for everyone or for every project, and it's certainly customizable, but I truly believe, and I know that there's others who would argue with me on this, but I truly believe having rigorous process around innovation will benefit the organization more than slow it down or slow down the progress. So we can zoom in on this a little bit, and first we can talk about—
I was going to go to the legend first, yeah.
Yeah, we can talk about what actually is a RACI matrix. It's a tool that was developed well over 20 years ago and really popularized by GE in the Six Sigma efforts. In their version, it was RACI, which considered who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed. In my work, I found it's also important to talk about who's supporting a given task. So throughout the life of any project, there are stages and tasks which must be executed. The most important resource in executing that task is the green A, and that's the single person who's on the hook for delivery. If you have multiple people who are accountable for a given task or stage, really no one's accountable. So it's important to have just a single person who has yes/no authority of a given task. Everything else you can have multiple parties helping out, but it's that, the key is that single accountable party. The next kind of most important piece is the responsible resource. These are the roles or the people who are responsible for execution of a given task. This may be the same person as the accountable resource, or it may be a set of resources who are responsible for executing. But it's important to know who's actually going to be doing the work, and it's not always that accountable person who does the work. The supportive role is that person or persons who help and directly assist the responsible party. So maybe it's a shared resource like an analytics department or a market research department, building awareness that they need to help out at a given stage in an innovation project is important from the outset. So you're not surprising them that you need their resources down the line. The consulted resource is a person or maybe even a whole team that might weigh in. This might be an external vendor. It might, again, be the market research department. It might be the IT department or some department that's providing input to the task at hand. And ultimately, there's also a set of people who really just need to be informed about progress. So maybe they need to see the regular reporting on what's going on. So they get the blue eyes on the matrix, and we can go into a specific set of tasks here and just illustrate one kind of stage in the next slide. So hopefully with every innovation initiative, it starts with innovation strategy. So that's the project stage that hopefully is at the outset of most every initiative. Maybe inside of that stage, the broad strokes are that you need to identify the problem, you need to have some scope and vision definition, and you need to identify resources and procure them. And then some of the tasks that you might need to do are defining what is the vision of innovation, defining the scope of the initiative, defining how you're going to screen ideas and concepts, coming up with the resource strategy, the budget definition, and selecting the business problem that is actually going to be solved. In this example we're showing here, you may have an organizational chief innovation officer who is accountable for each and every one of those tasks, but may or may not be doing the work. So you'll see that the work in many of these tasks is actually going to be done by some sort of innovation steering committee, or in the case of maybe something in the weeds like developing screening criteria, you have an innovation manager who's responsible for doing that work. Now there's also all these roles that are consulted along the way. So for instance, as you develop your resource strategy, you may have to go to the chief technology officer and say, here's who we think we need. Can you help us figure out who are the right resources inside of this resource strategy? Or the chief marketing officer, you may go to and say, we're going to be building this new program. We're going to need some help. Who can we have from a marketing perspective? So those consulted resources, they're not on the hook. They're not accountable. They're not responsible for building the strategy, but they will be consulted, and they need to know that they're going to be called upon. Others, maybe you just need to hear about budget from the innovation resource, but you don't actually have to weigh in on it. So the chief marketing officer, for instance, may not care what the innovation budget is, but your chief technology officer may care more and may have to weigh in and give you some money. And then finally, supporting roles, innovation manager may be supporting at every step along the way.
Yeah, and I would like to ask Aaron, have you found this useful when you talk about clarifying roles? Have you found it useful in keeping people who really shouldn't be involved in a very hands-on way and sort of reminding them like, hey, you're supposed to be, you're a blue eye, an informed person. You're not here pulling the strings.
Yeah. Actually, to my point before, it's important to draw attention to what's not there, right? If you just list out the tasks, everyone's going to think they're accountable for some of those tasks, or may want to have that consulting role in those tasks. So by putting it out there and getting everyone to agree to their role with each of these tasks, you can avoid that situation. I had a chief technology officer in a past life who wanted to know about every single thing that we were doing in innovation. So I started providing him with that reporting, and that was the worst mistake I could have possibly made, because it started leading to him wanting to weigh in on everything. So you do also have to take a look at this holistically and ask yourself, does each resource truly need to even be informed? Is some of this secret, or is all of this informing or consulting going to slow down the project too much? This is a great tool for looking at that from the bird's eye view and trying to understand just how much work is going in innovation. And is that too much work? Can we simplify it?
Great. I want to move on. We just have this one last resource to talk about, and it gets to what Hussein was asking about in the chat window on innovation culture. And a lot of the stuff that Aaron has been talking about so far, and that I've covered, may have some effect on innovation culture. Potentially you're doing some open innovation initiatives or idea challenges, or you're rolling out new kinds of training methodologies, maybe around design thinking or lean startup. And so you want to know, well, is this having any impact on the company culture overall? I think anybody who has worked in a large company knows that the culture is built up over decades and decades. The larger the company, sometimes it feels like the more difficult, or usually it's true that the more difficult it is to see the culture evolving or changing in any way. So we asked a bunch of our members who do run some kind of culture survey, what questions do they tend to ask? The thing that we heard about culture surveys is shorter is better. So we created a database of, I think, about 20 questions. Some of them have this 1 to 5 scale. Some of them are open-ended, but it's really, the idea is you would pick, 4 or 5, 7 questions from that database to use in a quarterly or annual survey. I'd be curious for Aaron's opinion on, we did hear that some people do run quarterly surveys. To me, it feels like, well, that's almost asking for, a lot of data that may not show enough of a change over that time period. But I think the bulk of people told us they run annual surveys on culture. And, you'll see some of the questions here are, I'm someone who gets involved in the company's innovation efforts. I feel like I have the time, training, funding to bring my ideas to life. The company has incentives that encourage me to take risks. I get credit for new ideas and working to make them happen. I understand the company's priorities related to innovation and the kinds of new ideas we're looking for. So how well is the innovation group communicating? What is the focus for these innovation efforts? And one thing you'll notice in the language is that people told us talking about new ideas and risk taking and you'll see new ideas kind of repeated. Can sometimes be better language than innovation, which is a really fuzzy term. And like, well, what does it mean that I'm an innovative person? So some people said they kind of prefer that more concrete idea of, self-guided projects or new ideas or that sort of thing. Aaron, I'm curious if you would take a crack at that, quarterly versus annual question.
Yeah, I've in my last few years at Transamerica, we kept hearing this notion of what's called survey fatigue. We were asking too much of our employees to constantly weigh in on any initiative. So the questioning of employees isn't just going to come from the innovation initiative. And so you need to kind of recognize and balance that they're going to get an annual survey, they're getting survey from their internal business partners, they're getting surveyed to death. So if you are able to pull back and do this annually and maybe combine it with an annual employee or HR survey, I think that's the best approach. And also because culture doesn't change very quickly. So to your point, Scott, you may not see measurable changes in behaviors and feelings and attitudes in a quarter. It may take constant exposure over 6 to 9 months to a new realm or new domain or new paradigm to actually start to change the behavior and feeling of the culture.
And yeah, I think a lot of examples we've seen, almost anything you do, no matter how good it is, how thoughtful it is, how much the CEO is involved, people in a large company are to be skeptical for the first 6 months or the year or a year. And it's like, well, it's the second time you've done the award ceremony or the second time you've done an idea challenge that people feel like something is really here to stay, as opposed to, like yet another flavor of the month program that the CEO is talking about. So we'd love to take your questions, either in the chat window, or I'm happy to unmute you if you are not, if you're dialed in and not logged on. One thing I want to mention as you're getting questions ready is just a couple things that we have coming next. If you're a member of Innovation Leader, towards the end of May, you should see the next issue of our print magazine. We've got a really cool list of the top 10 cities for corporate innovation activity as the cover story. June 14th and 15th, we're doing a field study expedition to Washington, D.C. and visiting Capital One Labs, Lockheed Martin, Marriott's underground prototyping lab. We're talking to the CEO of Marriott. June, we have a research report on communications, governance, and reporting, some of the stuff we've been talking about today. And then June, July, we have webcasts with Fidelity Investments and Northeastern University. And finally, on the calendar, July 14th, we're doing an event here in Boston called The Network that's really intended for people in the world of consulting, software services, expertise, training, the people who work around corporate innovation to sort of share what they're doing, seeing, learning, and hopefully help everybody make new connections. So let's see if there are some questions. There's one question in the chat window that that's about the innovation champion. I did not hear anything about the innovation champion. Is it the chief innovation officer? And how does he or she emerge typically? Aaron, do you want to take that one, and then I'll unmute folks if they want to ask the spoken kind of question?
Yeah, I've seen it come from a few different sources. There can be a grassroots innovation effort of just passionate employees who band together to start to share ideas and work in a different manner. And innovation can be spawned from that, in which case the champion is someone who's coming from, maybe from left field to approach the executive team and say, you know what, I'm not feeling the innovation agenda. We've put together maybe this case for innovation. And so it might just be just Joe employee who's approaching the executive team. But in many instances, you also have a formal declaration from a CEO or from a marketing head that we're going to be more innovative, and we've appointed so-and-so to lead the charge. In that case, you'll have the innovation champion be, say, a chief innovation officer or a head of innovation, or maybe the head of marketing who's been tasked with innovation. Lots of different flavors of that. And I don't think innovation is so complex. I don't think there's a best way or even a really common way that emerges. Okay,
let me. So everyone's unmuted. If you want to ask a question the old-fashioned way, go ahead. There is a question in chat, and go ahead. Anyone who would like to ask a question, and then we can go to the one in the chat window. Anyone who's out there on the phone have a question? Okay. Timothy, if you're on the phone, maybe you can clarify your question a little bit. So Timothy asked, I was curious if you had documentation or templates for corporate innovation model builds, or if they vary drastically. I'm not totally clear on corporate innovation model builds. Timothy, if you can unmute yourself, do you want to explain, or Aaron, maybe you grasp that question? Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I left out a key word. It was around revenue, kind of like when executive management leadership asks for revenue models. Just curious, those seem to be all stemming from a lot of places. If you guys had any recommendations on how to build those out, or what you've seen in your experience.
So just to clarify, is that a question about, very often you're asked to project the revenue of an innovation initiative far too early.
Right.
Is that a question about that? Trying to, is there a good model for articulating what you might expect the growth of a certain project or initiative to look like?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, when you think about typical kind of corporate innovation setups, you might have a center where there's different streams. You might be running sprints or incubators where there could be potential streams, and there's a lot of risks with putting that forward, I feel, pretty early, kind of like what you were alluding to.
Yeah, personally, I always asked my CEO, when I led the innovation charge, I always asked my CEO to hold me accountable for the organization's growth goals. So, if the organization is growing at, say, 10% year-over-year revenue, we are accomplishing our goals. Because I found it was so hard. The innovation accounting was just so tricky. A seed of an idea from one department can end up affecting revenue in a completely unrelated department. So having some way to account for that could be, you could be chasing your tail, and it could be next to impossible to even understand how much of the innovation initiative is affecting, say, business as usual. So I always tried to avoid it. Now, there are going to be executives who ask for more detail, all of those different projects. How are they going to accumulate into executing our growth goals? And in that case, I'd say you have to maintain a portfolio approach. So maybe categorizing the classic 2x2 matrix. What are the types of innovations that are going on? And for each one of those, projecting the same metric over a given time horizon, and with some sort of probability of the outcome. It could be a 10% probability or a 90% probability that you'll get that revenue growth. And then you can maybe estimate the entire contribution of that portfolio of initiatives over some given period of time. So that's the way I would try to approach it if an executive insisted on having that sort of revenue model built.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just underscore one thing that Aaron said, which is, you know, often big companies have the big number bias where when they see numbers that, you know, that end in million and not billion, you know, they kind of look at it as chopped liver. And so that can be part of the problem with creating revenue models for the first, second, or third year of something that's very experimental, or, you know, you're building for an emerging market or for a customer base that you've never sold to before. You know, and I remember talking with somebody pretty high up at Disney who talked about that as like, you know, an implicit bias that they tended to wait and buy companies, you know, that were 5 or 7 years old and had kind of had the patience to watch the revenue grow from the millions into the tens of millions, versus doing that sort of thing internally when they couldn't, you know, from the outset see how this was going to be a billion-dollar business. To the question of will the decks be sent out? Yes, we can send out the deck to everyone who's participating. We'll also have a recording of the webcast. I'm curious if there are any other questions that folks want to ask either on phone or in the chat window before we wrap up. Aaron, I guess maybe this is a good question for the participants before they log off, which is, are there other resources, documents, templates that you think we should create next? This is the like taking requests part of the webcast. If there's some stuff that, you know, those of you logged on would find useful or haven't been able to find anywhere else, we're going to continue this this resource creation project, and you know, would love to get some input either now or if you'd like to email editor@innovationleader.com. We can do it that way as well. But I think we should thank everyone for logging on or dialing in this afternoon. Thank you, Aaron, for all the great work that you put into these, and you know, for participating in the webcast today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. You know, I always enjoy talking innovation. I look
all
forward
right.
to it.
Cool. You covered a lot of ground, and thanks everyone for your questions and your time this afternoon. If you're receiving the email newsletter, you'll be up to speed on all of our future events and webcasts and conference calls. So hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.